And this lecture I called The Fingerprint of God, as you can see. Now, you might be scared by the number of texts I put up there, and it's a bit scary, and the risk is we'll end up reading great wads of scripture. But what my hope is, I want to take you through a range of stuff which will, I hope, be illuminating and I think a bit exciting what's in it. And some stuff I'll read fairly completely, and some stuff I'll jump. I won't read all of it because it would just be too much to read. And this is what I had in mind was we're going to look at the image of wisdom in the Bible. And this is a very unusual part of the biblical books. They're called the wisdom books, and they're not limited to the books, but also there are wisdom psalms as well, such as Psalm 1. And in these reflections, which are not all joined up together, there's an image of what wisdom is like. And the Hebrew word for wisdom is chokmah, Hokhmah, chokmah. And you won't be surprised to know that she's a woman, not a man. What's kind of interesting is that the reflection on wisdom, which occurs in our Bible, the Hebrew Bible, also the Greek Old Testament, isn't special to Israel. It's part of a wider experience of the search for wisdom in the ancient Near East, and particularly with Egypt and Mesopotamia. There was a kind of a movement, so to speak, which found its way then in part into the biblical books. Oops, sorry. Anyway, it found its way into the biblical books, and it can be very attractive because mostly, not completely, it's kind of non-national. It's kind of a wide spirituality, not particularly tied to Israel. It's the human search for order and goodness in the chaos of life. And I say there on the screen there, it's available in the ancient Near East. And it's the goddess of wisdom, for instance, in Egypt was called Ma'at. You may have come across her. I got a picture of her on the next slide. You can take a peep. She's lovely. It's used variably and richly because wisdom can go from, proverbial wisdom. What to do if you're dining with a king. Don't eat too fast. Use the right cutlery. That kind of stuff. Very practical. How to bring up your children, very practical stuff, to much bigger stuff on what does it mean to be human, what is wisdom, how do we find it. And generally speaking, the people divide the wisdom books into two kinds. There's proverbial wisdom, which is found mostly now in the book of Proverbs. But there are also longer studies of wisdom, such as Ecclesiastes, or Ecclesiasticus, or the book of Job. And they're much bigger, much bigger reflections. And you might wonder, who had the leisure and the finance, to sit down and produce these things? And it's often thought that these things come out of some sort of court administration, the kind of the civil service around rulers in all parts of the ancient Near East, including Israel. And we'll be looking mostly at what the second larger wisdom is called tractate wisdom, because it's a longer reflection, more sustained. And as I say there, it can be practical, awfully practical, and then also speculative, kind of interesting. Now, standing right back from it all, what they're doing with the big wisdom speculation is they're negotiating what every religious person has to negotiate, which is somehow to affirm that God is within us and within creation, and that God is beyond us and beyond creation. So you want to catch the two sides. And if I were using kind of theological terms, I would say we have to negotiate God within, that is God's immanence, so God's present in everything that is, and then God's beyondness or God's transcendence. And every religious tradition, to some degree, has to do that. Now, we do it in our Christian frame by talking about Jesus of Nazareth and the Holy Spirit. You know, the concrete historical reality and the bigger spiritual reality. So we do it. The ancient Israelites did it by talking about Lady Wisdom. Now, there's no one big consistent doctrine, but it comes up in a number of places. And in the literature, she's called Lady Wisdom, or Dame Wisdom, or some kind of title like that. And the way she's portrayed, now this is obviously a patriarchal society, she's portrayed as offering shelter, that is to say a home, nourishment, so hospitality, and companionship. So the role of a woman in that society as a wife, effectively, is to be a homemaker, the provider of the food, and companionship. And the idea is that just as a wife complements her husband, wisdom complements the human being. That's the idea. So in other words, to be complete, just as a human being needs a life partner, likewise the human being needs the life partner of wisdom. So and that's why they use this language of shelter, nourishment, and companionship. It's culturally bound, obviously. Does that make sense? Just to get you into, anyway, here's my dear friend, Ma'at. And this is the Egyptian, it's very interesting. She comprised the ancient Egyptian concepts of truth, balance, order, harmony, law, morality, and justice. Okay, so that's a deal. And the general quest for wisdom is, if you can discover the secret of truth, balance, order, harmony, law, morality, and justice, you will live a happy life. If you can tune in to that reality in your life. Not everybody wakes up to this, but anyway. And then so she's wisdom, as you can see, Chokhmah in Hebrew. She was the goddess who personified these concepts, and she had quite a lot of jobs. She regulated the stars, the seasons, the actions of mortals, and the deities who brought order out of chaos at the moment of creation. So she had a lot on her plate. And that's the kind of picture that's in our biblical books as well. As you can see, it's what they call international wisdom. So it's not unique to Israel at all, but they do have their own take on it. Huh? Did you want to ask anything about that before I go on to look at some of these things? I'll take a picture.
Indication that
she
was higher than the deities?
No. Well, in the Egyptian thing, I don't think so.
Is that regulated the star seasons and the actions
And the Lord who managed the yeah. Well, in the biblical books, she's both God and not God. Do you know? As you can see, so maybe there's something of that also in the Egyptian stuff, but. Well, the tradition then, you see, in Christianity, this spiritual tradition of the principle of order in creation, that went three directions in Christian reflection. So it went towards the incarnation, that Jesus' wisdom made flesh. It went towards the Holy Spirit, and then in a later tradition, the stuff got attached to the Blessed Virgin as the seat of wisdom. So it went in different directions within the Christian tradition. Unforeseen, obviously, in the Bible, as you can imagine. So I'll give you a sample. I'm going to look at one part of the book of Job. The book of Job, as you know, can be quite hard to read if you ever tried to paddle your way through it. Because it's a big conflict between Job and the friends. And the friends are telling Job, you've done wrong, come clean, you'll feel better. And Job resists that pretty strongly. But in the course of all the reflections, there's a little pool of quiet reflection. Suddenly, everybody is silenced, and there's this chapter 28, a beautiful poem about wisdom. And it's sort of in the middle of the conflict, because the conflict goes on until chapter 38. So in the middle of the conflict, you get this little pool of quiet, which in some ways is very cleverly inserted, because it anticipates the contemplative part of God's reply to Job in chapters 38 and 39. And the contemplative part is, there's far more to this than you can know. Shut up. Basically. And I, if you don't mind, I will read all of the Job 28, because it's actually very, very fine.
Sorry, I have just one question.
Sure.
It's not in my Bible.
What isn't?
Why
What's not in your Bible?
it's the international version.
What's not in your Bible?
Wisdom, the book of wisdom.
It isn't, no, it wouldn't be. It's one of the deuterocanonical books, rejected at the Reformation. And your translation is a Protestant translation.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes known as the Northern Ireland version, NIV. I say invest in a new Bible. Anyway, I'll come to that, because I'm going to talk about the Book of Wisdom, actually. Anyway, here goes the Book of Job, anyway. He's just reflecting on the elusiveness of wisdom. And this is a thing you could use for prayer kind of very easily. Surely there is a mine for silver and a place for gold to be refined. Iron is taken out of the earth, and copper is smelted from ore. Miners put an end to darkness. That's to say, they go down with candles. And search out the farthest bound, in the farthest bound, ore in gloom and deep darkness. So this is kind of going down into the earth. They open shafts in a valley away from human habitation. They're forgotten by travellers. They sway suspended, remote from people. They're on ropes, on their way down. Can you imagine? As for the earth, out of it comes bread, but underneath it is turned up as by fire. It's a little intuition, there's something warm down there. Its stones are the place of sapphires, and its dust contains gold. So this is the search for treasure. Okay. Then it goes on. That path no bird of prey knows, and the falcon's eye has not seen it. Well, of course, it's all underground. The proud wild elements have not trodden it. The lion has not passed over it. They put their hand to the flinty rock and overturn mountains by the roots. So they're drilling. They cut out channels in the rocks, and their eyes see every precious thing. The sources of the rivers they probe. Hidden things they bring to light. But where is wisdom to be found? That's the question. And where is the place of understanding? Mortals do not know the way to it. It is not found in the land of the living. The deep says to me, it's not in me. And the sea says, it's not with me. It cannot be gotten for gold, and silver cannot be weighed out as its price. It cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir, the most precious gold of the Middle East, in precious onyx or sapphire. Gold and glass cannot equal it, nor can be exchanged for jewels of fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral or of crystal. The price of wisdom is above pearls. Lovely imagery, yeah? The chrysolite of Cush, that's a stone from Ethiopia, cannot compare with it, nor can be valued in pure gold. Where then does wisdom come from, and where's the place of understanding? It's hidden from the eyes of all the living and concealed from the birds of the air. Now, Abaddon means destruction. Okay, Abaddon and death. These are the almighty forces that bring everybody down. So Abaddon and death, and they have a lot of power. But Abaddon and death say, we have heard a rumour of it with our ears. So even these marvellous figures have no idea where this is. God understands the way to it, and he knows its place. For he looks to the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When he gave to the wind its weight and apportioned out the waters by measure, when he made a decree for the rain and a way for the thunderbolt, then he saw it and declared it, and he established it and searched it out. And he said to humankind, truly, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. Very practical answer at the end. But in other words, the whole poem implies a quest for something that's really hard to get a hold of. And the comparison is that people make enormous efforts to get, precious jewels and gems down on the ground. And a much greater effort is needed for the search for wisdom, and that's in the gift of God. Huh? So powerful imagery in this lovely poem. Just to say a tiny word about the word fear there, which can disturb people. It means awe, so A-W-E, awe. Sometimes it can be also you can use the word dread if that's not too negative, kind of that sense of being before the mystery of God. That gives you an idea then of the search for wisdom and its elusiveness, and there's a lot of personification of that. That gives you a picture. The second place I want to go to is the book of Proverbs. So I'll do a bit of skipping here because there's kind of a little bit too much text really to be going through all of it, but there's time to read it yourselves afterwards. And this is where the figure of Lady Wisdom appears, the personification of wisdom. And she's offered as feminine in a patriarchal society, and so complementary. And she's offering, as I was saying earlier, shelter, nourishment, and companionship. Now there's another woman called Dame Folly. And the trouble is, they resemble each other. And you can easily be led astray by making the wrong choice. So that's the way the language presents it. Huh? She's outwardly the same, but as soon as you pop into her arms, you're in real trouble. Huh? So I'll show you one or two, just at the very beginning of chapter 1, if you don't mind. It's on your handout there on page 8, just to show you. Wisdom cries out in the street, in the square she raises her voice. At the busiest corner she cries out, at the entrance of the city gate she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? Give heed to my reproof. I will pour out my thoughts to you. I will make my words known to you. Because I have called and you refused, and have stretched out my hand and no one heeded, and because you've ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when panic strikes you. When panic and your calamity comes, panic strikes like a storm, and your calamity comes like a whirlwind. When distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call upon you, I will not answer, and so on. And she's making her offer anyway. So there she is. Anyway, she's advertising. But the most extraordinary part in the book of Proverbs is chapter 8. Now you have to pay close attention to what's said in chapter 8. And you'll notice that there's a kind of ambiguity. You get the idea that wisdom is created, but somehow created before creation. And I think the ambiguity is intended, because the writer wants to say something of God has come out and gone into all that is. But at the same time, he doesn't want us to kind of worship all that is. So you're doing that sort of very nice balance that's very helpful here. Huh? So now she's described here. You'll notice as you go down, she's no longer a housewife. She's an engineer. Okay, so she's constructing, which makes sense because the Hebrew word for wisdom, for knowledge rather, bina, means comes from the verb to construct. So knowledge is something constructed. So the Lord created me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of long ago. Ages ago I was set up at the first, before the beginning of the earth. When there were no depths, so no te'om, I was brought forth. And when there were no springs abounding with water, before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills, I was brought forth. When he had not yet made earth and fields, or the world's first bits of soil, when he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, when he established the fountains of the deep, when he assigned to the sea its limit, so the waters might not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, I was beside him, like a master worker. I was daily his delight, playing before him always, playing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the human race. That's a wonderful image, as you can see. And there's an ambiguity. You know, somehow wisdom is God's partner in creation, and yet also wisdom was also created, but before creation was created. So you get this very unusual tension in the telling. And
But there's a lovely hymn we all know, When Creation Was Begun.
yes, yeah,
You know,
yeah. It's
I was there.
it's inspired by this kind of stuff, but this itself really belongs to the international wisdom. That's to say, there's a logic, there's a beauty, and there's an order in all that is because God's mind is expressed in the goodness of creation. So that's what they're really trying to say, and as always in the wisdom books, if you paid attention to creation and sat with it and discovered its laws and how it operates and so on, you'd be near to God. You get something of the mind of God. That's the idea.
Is it an aspect of God? Really?
Well,
You know, an attribute, what we would call it an attribute.
yes. Well, the Book of Wisdom firms that up in the direction that wisdom is actually the mind of God. But the later Book of Wisdom and the other books say, actually, it's incarnated in Jewish tradition in the Torah. So they go different directions in trying to deal with it. And see, they're trying to negotiate, as I say, the beyond and the within. And that's always kind of tricky, because if you emphasize one more than the other, you lose the tension, and it no
I
longer.
don't think an obvious separateness is helpful. To me, it's not, because it's too separate.
Yeah, and the guy here is the writer here is sitting on the ambiguity. You know, before I created, I created. Hello? Well, which was it? Which was it?
If wisdom is an attribute, an aspect of God,
Yeah.
then under God's graces, or why it was already in God,
Yes.
then why does it say grace?
Yes, that's a good question. If it's already an aspect of God, why does it say God created me? And it's really to maintain that sort of tension, so that something of God is in all that is, but nevertheless, the creation itself is not to be worshipped as if it was somehow God. So they want to keep that sort of, and there's an ambiguity which in the book of Proverbs is not resolved. They just sit with it. And that's okay. But in other books, it gets resolved in different directions, with different power and imagery. Yeah? That's why I put there on the seat, created before creation. How do you mean? You know,
Yeah.
oh, what's going on there? And in chapter 9, then in the Book of Wisdom, she finally comes into her own as a hostess. So here she is. Wisdom has built her house. That's the place of hospitality. She has hewn her 7 pillars, so the 7 pillars of wisdom. Then she slaughtered her animals. She mixed her wine. She also set her table. Then she sent out her female servants, and she calls out from the highest place in the town, you who are simple, turn in here. To those without sense, she says, come eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Lay aside immaturity and live and walk in the way of insight. See, now Dame Folly makes exactly the same invitation, and she sounds just as attractive, but if you go down that route, you'll be destroyed, more or less. So the ambiguity of living. Then, just to show you, the book. I'm going to spend the afternoon on the book of Sirach. Just a tiny word about it. It's a late wisdom book. So from the 2nd century BC. It's deuterocanonical, which means it's found in the Bibles of the Orthodox and the Catholics and some Anglicans, but not in the Reformation Bible. That's for the reason for that is, at the time of the Reformation, Martin Luther decided that only the books written in Hebrew should be accepted, whereas these books come down in Greek. And he has a bit of support in St. Jerome, who was in favour of books written only in Hebrew. But Jeremy's voice wasn't the general one. In fact, throughout 15 centuries, all the books were read, the ones written in Greek and in Hebrew. The reason why Martin Luther spoke against the books written in Greek was that in one of the books, so the books of 1 and 2 Maccabees, there's a recommendation for the prayer for the dead. And of course, in the Reformation frame, you can't be praying for the dead because they're either in hell, where you're wasting your time, or they're in heaven and they don't need it. It's simple. And therefore, these books can't really be inspired because they don't fit with the Reformation doctrine of no intermediate state, where people could be helped. That meant then that they got rid of the 7 books of wisdom that are special within the Catholic tradition, which I think I wouldn't like to be without. I wouldn't like to be without Sirach. And I know he's a curmudgeonly misogynist at times. He can be really terrible, but he's also wonderful on creation, so he's great on that. And I wouldn't be without the Book of Wisdom for the life of me. It's just a fabulous book, Anyway, in this poem in Sirach, he says, wisdom is found in the Torah. That's just, the Torah there means, we translate it usually as law, but Torah means instruction. It's how to live. And the books of the Torah are the Pentateuch, and they contain two kinds of instruction. There's story instruction and there's law instruction, and both are instruction, as we know from reading St. Paul. And in this short little poem, Sirach teaches very concretely that wisdom is I'm using this word kind of carefully, almost incarnated in the Pentateuch, the Torah, the Jewish law. And this sort of language anticipates powerfully the way John's Gospel will talk about the incarnate Word. You'll see it straight away, you won't miss it. And there's a sudden joining up of the transcendent and the historical. But Sirach is very much in favour of tradition, in favour of temple worship, and holding on to the core values. He's quite old-fashioned in his theology, even though it's a late wisdom book. So it's on page 9, and I might read it and go through and just comment on it. It's on page 9 on our handouts at the bottom of the page, Sirach 24. This sounds a bit strange to us. It belongs to a type of poem well known in wisdom literature, also internationally, the Egyptians and Mesopotamians, where wisdom praises herself. And we would have the old proverb, self-praise is no praise. But this is regular, and they're called aretologies, where somebody proclaims her virtues, untrammeled by false modesty. But here goes. Wisdom praises herself. No one could do it better. And tells of her glory in the midst of her people. In the assembly of the Most High, she opens her mouth, and in the presence of his host, she tells her story. Now, I think this is very beautiful. I came forth from the mouth of the Most High and covered the earth like a mist. That's a very interesting image. It means the breath of God. And just as breath is essential for staying alive, the breath of God is part of who God is. So, I encamped in the heights, and my throne was in a pillar of cloud. Alone, I compassed the vault of heaven and traversed the depths of the abyss. So I was involved in all of creation. Over waves of the sea, over all the earth, and over every people and nation, I have held sway. Now, Ma'at would have understood all of that. It's just like Ma'at. Among these people, I sought a resting place. In whose inheritance should I abide? Then the Creator of all things gave me a command, and my Creator pitched my tent. That's a very interesting image, isn't it? Now, as you know, in John's Gospel, when it says he dwelt among us, it says literally in Greek, he camped among us. He pitched his tent among us, literally in Greek. So this is picked up, obviously, then in John's Gospel very clearly. So, pitch my tent, and he said, in case we missed it, encamp in Jacob. So make your home there. And in Israel, receive your inheritance. And then it goes on then with this lovely ambiguity. Before the ages, in the beginning, he created me, and for all ages I shall not cease to be. So the wisdom is from God before creation and everlasting. In the holy tent, so Sirach is interested in temple worship, I ministered before him, and so I was established in Zion. Thus in the beloved city he gave me a resting place, and Jerusalem was my domain. I took root in an honoured people, in the portion of the Lord is my inheritance. So that's a little bit unusual in the wisdom books, because the wisdom books are usually highly international. This is something to do with the general human condition. Whereas here, the book of Sirach says, actually, it's landed in one particular people, in one particular place, concretely. That's a little bit unusual in the wisdom books, because generally they're speaking much more. They're not at all nationalistic. That's one of their great appeals, is that there's a biblical spirituality which is not tied to the political nation of Israel. It's one of the attractions of the wisdom books, really, for us today. Now, something similar comes up in another deuterocanonical book, the book of Baruch, which also won't be in your NIV Bible. As it stands, the book is composite and late and hard to figure out how this book was made. It's not sure that the temple is still standing or has it been restored. Now, it's given a bit of importance, so it's one of the readings for the Easter Vigil. So it's rich, and also for the second Sunday of Advent. So there's something in there, the book of Baruch. Baruch is a person, yeah. In theory and principle, it's the secretary of Jeremiah, who had a secretary called Baruch. But it's not known what the connection is between the secretary of Jeremiah and this book. It's just not known, really, what the connection is. But that's often the case with the Bible. People speculate and wonder, but often it's just not known what's going on. Now, in this one here, the writer lands in again on the people of Israel. So I might take you down through the text. On page 10, about a third of the way down, Praise of Wisdom. Hear, O Israel, the commandments of life. Give ear and learn wisdom. Why is it, O Israel, why is it that you are in the land of your enemies, that you are growing old in a foreign land, that you are defiled with the dead, that you are counted among those in Hades? You have forsaken the fountain of wisdom. If you'd walked in the way of God, you would be living in peace forever. Learn where there is wisdom, where there is strength, where there is understanding, that you may at the same time discern where there is length of days in life, where there is light for the eyes and peace. You couldn't be against it, eh? Who doesn't want that? Who has found her place, and who has entered her storehouses? Where are the rulers of the nations, and those who lorded over the animals of the earth, those who made sport of the birds of the air, and who hoarded up silver and gold, in which people trust, and there is no end to their getting? Those who schemed to get silver and were anxious, but there is no trace of their works, and they're gone. They have vanished and gone down to Hades, and the others have arisen in their place. Younger people have seen the light of day and have lived upon the earth, but they have not learned the way to knowledge, nor understand her paths, nor lay hold of her. Their descendants have strayed far from their way. She's not been heard of in Canaan or seen in Teman. The descendants of Hagar, those who seek understanding of the earth, the merchants of Meran and Teman, the storytellers and the seekers for understanding, have not learned the way to wisdom or given thought to her paths. O Israel, how great is the house of the Lord, how vast the territory that he possesses. It is great and has no bounds. It is high and immeasurable. The giants were born there, who were famous of old, great in stature, expert in war. God did not choose them or give them the way to knowledge, so they perished because they had no wisdom. They perished through their folly. Who has gone up into heaven and taken her and brought her down from the clouds? Who has gone over the sea and found her and will buy her for pure gold? No one knows the way to her or is concerned with about the path to her. But the one who knows all things knows her. He found her by his understanding. the one who prepared the earth for all time and filled it with four-footed creatures, called quadrupeds. The one who sends forth the light and it goes. He called and it obeyed him trembling. The stars shone in their watches and were glad. He called them and they said, here we are. They shone with gladness for him who made them. This is our God. Then this is where it lands in. No other can be compared to him. He found the way to knowledge and gave her to his servant Jacob and to Israel whom he loved. Afterward, she appeared on earth and lived with humankind. And then in case we missed it, she is the book of the commandments of God. So it lands right in, and it means really the Pentateuch, the Torah, the book of the story instructions and the law instructions. And what they're saying there is that all that marvelous search for wisdom can be found in the core of your tradition if only you paid attention to it. So it's very strong, a lovely affirmation. Eh? So she is the book of the commandments of the Lord, the law that endures forever. All who hold her fast will live, and those who forsake her will die. Turn, O Jacob, and take her, walk towards the shining of her light. Do not give your glory to another, or your advantages to a foreign nation. Happy are we, O Israel, for we know what's pleasing to God. So that's a very interesting evolution. Eh? So in other words, the concrete advice of how to live well is found here. What you're looking for overall. Challenge. It's really not known. So so we're talking about 4th, 3rd century BC. So post-Jeremiah, no doubt. Post-exile. And the temple, it's hard to tell if the temple has been rebuilt or not. It's just hard to tell. If the temple has been rebuilt, then that means sometime from about 500 BC onwards. If the temple had not been rebuilt, then a little bit before that. But it's just not clear. But you can see what they're doing. They're saying that the human heart, the quest for order in your life and inner tranquility, which is a human quest found in the Middle East, is met by God's guidance in the book of the Torah, kind of almost incarnated, encamping among them. Now, the other place where you find this kind of material, there's a little outline of Baruch, where we just saw the poem, that's fine. The other place, now I'll delay a little bit on this and talk a little bit about it, is the Book of Wisdom. Now, the Book of Wisdom is also not in the NIV, because this one was written straight into Greek, whereas Sirach was written originally in Hebrew and translated into Greek. But the Book of Wisdom was written straight, and there's no Hebrew version of that existing. Probably you know all this, but it was written in Alexandria in Egypt, where there was a very large and erudite Jewish community. And peculiarly, in Alexandria, it was very tempting for the young members of the community to be attracted by the surrounding Egyptian religions, which were, at the time, very powerful and rich culture, both educationally and militarily and economically. It would be very easy to be tempted away from your core religion. And this book is written for youngsters, about 17 to 20. Now, whether they ever picked it up and read it and made any difference is not known, but it's really aimed at them. And the very first part of the book is an invitation to wisdom, the very first part. And it contrasts two opposites all along in several kind of what you might call diptychs or pairs of panels of reflection. Very, very powerful. Including the lovely thing that's often read at funerals. The souls of the righteous are in the hands of God, and that's against the surrounding culture, which is saying, when you're dead, forget it. So, but it's very, very contrasting. And what the book finally says, a bit like the book of Baruch and the book of Sirach, that what you're looking for externally in the apparently attractive Egyptian religions, of which there are many, if you paid attention to your core tradition, you would find it in there. And to make that clear, in the middle of the book, there's a section where Solomon prays for wisdom. It's chapters 7 to 9. Now, Solomon is the proverbial figure of wisdom. To him was attributed the books of, in the Jewish tradition, they said that he wrote 3 books. He wrote the Song of Songs when he was young and lusty. He wrote the book of Proverbs in his middle age, and he wrote Ecclesiastes when he was old and miserable. It doesn't have to be that way. But that's what they said. And so the Book of Wisdom is attributed to Solomon. Now, Solomon was more or less 1,000 years dead when it was written, and he didn't know any Greek. So it always doesn't go back to Solomon. But they portray him praying for wisdom, a very earnest and beautiful prayer for wisdom in chapter 7. And in chapter 7, 8, and 9, there's a description of wisdom, which is profoundly in tune with Greek philosophy, profoundly, as I'll show you in a moment. And this is a very cultured book, where the writer has read the Stoics, the philosophers of the period, very well. And there's this wonderful passage. These chapters 7 to 9 are absolutely wonderful bits of writing. And then in the last part of the book, the writer has a bit of fun with idolatry, and it kind of mocks idolatry, and it more or less says, you pray to an image of a god as you're going across the Mediterranean, that it'll save you from the ocean, a little bit of carved goddess on a bit of wood. Well, actually, it's not the bit of wood in your hand that's getting across the ocean, it's the wooden boat under your bum that's getting across the ocean, more or less. But the writer has a bit of fun, contrasting and mocking a little bit. And then the writer goes on to retell the story from Adam to Moses, identifying all the characters, but not by name, as people who successfully sought wisdom. And so the invitation is, if you could emulate your great ancestors, you would make the same journey into wisdom that they made, which is what the youngsters are being attracted to. Does that make sense? So the Book of Wisdom is written about 30 BC in Alexandria, in Egypt, in Greek, and it's intended to advise youngsters at the end of their education that if they really did pay attention to their tradition, it would take them to the heart of what they're looking for externally in these other religious practices. So it's quite a move, the book of Wisdom. Now there's the shape of the middle bit of it. Do you see it? Chapter 9 is a prayer for wisdom, a very beautiful prayer for wisdom. But here's the overall shape. Look. Solomon is like other human beings. That takes it back to the book of Genesis. Everybody's equal. Solomon prayed and got wisdom and riches. He didn't pray for riches, but he got wisdom and riches. Solomon prays for eloquence about wisdom. Would he be able to speak about her correctly? And then the nature of wisdom in a quite remarkable passage, which I'll pause on, 7:22b to 8:1. And then it goes on then, Solomon sought wisdom, the source of knowledge. Solomon sought wisdom as counselor and comforter. And Solomon realizes wisdom is a gift from God. It's a fabulous bit of writing. It's very long to read, so I leave it for you mostly to read it. But I wouldn't mind reading verses 1 to 6, because it's actually very good. So at the bottom of page 11. I am a mortal like everyone else, a descendant of the first formed child of the earth. So, Adam. And in the womb of a mother I was moulded into flesh within the period of 10 months compacted with blood. Now the Egyptians counted a 10-month pregnancy. You wonder what's going on there. But anyway, but this tells you we're in Egypt. And compacted with the blood from the seed of a man and the pleasure of marriage. And when I was born, I began to breathe the common air and fell upon the kindred earth. So it was all of us. Huh? And then he says, my first sound was a cry. So, wah, as is true of all. And then it says, I was nursed with care in swaddling clothes. And that's where Luke gets the swaddling clothes in the infancy narratives. So it's an echo of the birth of Solomon, whose father was King David, of course. For no king has a different beginning of existence. There is for all one entrance into life, and one way out. Fair enough. Fair enough. That's all right. We can live with that. And then he prays. He talks about wisdom. He prays for eloquence about wisdom. And then at the very bottom, if you go down to 722b, at the very bottom there. Can't see anything. He suddenly uses, this, I think this is an extraordinary passage, he uses 21 metaphors for wisdom. Now 21 is 7 by 3, which is perfection. So it's meant to be some script. Now it's not so much the details. It's the kind of, the emotional pile-up is what's significant. Now he's talking about wisdom. There is in her a spirit that is intelligent, holy, unique, manifold, subtle, agile, clear, unpolluted, direct, invulnerable, loving the good, keen, irresistible, beneficent, humane, steadfast, sure, free from anxiety, all-powerful, overseeing all, and penetrating all spirits that are intelligent, pure, and altogether subtle. Fantastic image of what wisdom is about. Very, very, as you can see, very, very philosophical, and what you want. Huh? And then it says, wisdom is more mobile than any emotion. What he means by that is that she can enter into people. She's moving. Because her because of her pureness, she she pervades and penetrates all things. And then it uses 5 metaphors, which I'm going to pause on. She is a breath of the power of God, a pure emanation of the glory of God, for nothing defiled gains entrance into her, for she is a reflection of eternal light, a spotless mirror of the working of God, and an image of his goodness. Quite remarkable piece of writing. Now I'll show you those images very quickly. It says first of all that she is a breath. In Greek, atmis, the breath, it means moist vapor or steam. So in other words, something of what keeps God alive, just as breath keeps human alive, something of what keeps God alive has come out into creation. Also says an emanation. An emanation now is like steam coming off boiling water. So it's in other words, one reality becoming another reality. So she's regarded then as an emanation of God. And in case these are highly philosophical, as you can see from the notes there. These are highly philosophical terms used by contemporary writers. She's a reflection. That's hapaugasma, so a reflection of divine reason, also found in other people. And then she's a spotless mirror. I don't know if you remember, in those days, mirrors were not made of glass. They were made of hammered metal. And a spotless mirror was a very handy thing and a very rare thing to see yourself really clearly. So the esoptron, a mirror is something you look into. And in Philo, who was a great Jewish philosopher of the period, a little later, he said, for in a certain sense, the wisdom of the world was a mirror of the powers of God, in accordance with which it became perfect, and this universe is governed and managed. So the image. And then finally, then it uses the word icon. Do you see it? Eikon. This comes from Plato. It is wholly necessary that this cosmos should be a copy, an icona of something. So this is how the Platonic stuff works. And Philo, very educated Jew, contemporary of St. Paul, if the part is an image of an image, an eikon, eikonos, it is manifest that the whole is too. So everything in creation is an image of God, and the whole of creation is an image of God. So those are very powerful images for what God is, so to speak, up to in creation. And in effect, what the Book of Wisdom is saying is the mind of God is feminine, And the mind of God has found its way into all that is. That's why he's using this set of 5 metaphors and the 21 adjectives to contain this idea. And then that lovely passage then, just to finish on that passage, in chapter 8, on page 13, on verse 27. And the writer then comes to a conclusion. Although she is but one, she can do all things. Now that's a very old Greek conundrum of the one and the many. And because of the image of her mobility and this emanation and breath, she is one, but she can enter into all sorts of people's lives and still remaining herself. In every generation, while remaining in herself, she renews all things. In every generation, she passes into holy souls and makes them friends of God and prophets. For God loves nothing so much as the person who lives with wisdom. She is more beautiful than the sun and excels every constellation of the stars. Compared to the light, she is found to be more radiant. Imagine being more brilliant than light. Anyway. For it is succeeded by the night, but against wisdom evil does not prevail. She reaches mightily from one end of the earth to the other, and she orders all things well. It's a fabulous image, isn't it? Very, very powerful stuff. And so, that's a lot of text, I know, but it gives you. It's no harm to see it all in one go, and it can be reflected on later at your leisure. Huh? So wisdom, as I was saying earlier, is both very practical, very down to earth, and speculative. Now, we've been looking at the speculative stuff, very exalted, but it's also very practical. It's about goodness, beneficence, how to live. It's negotiating the God within, God as immanent, and God beyond, God as transcendent. And it's trying to, without using that philosophical language, it's trying to hold the two realities. So a kind of mediation between God and creation. And wisdom then in creation is an expression of the mind of God. So very, very powerful idea. And then in some of the traditions we saw in Sirach and Baruch, she is embodied or even incarnated, really, encamped in the Torah and in the temple. And then the writers are caught up in also in a sense of wonder. There is something of God in all that exists. And that sense, I mean, we're thinking about ecology. These are kind of biblical resources for ecology. And I think this really is a kind of a foundation view for respecting all that science discovers. And, the wonder, the astonishing things that science discovers about how all creation holds together. And it's wonderful that this whole marvelous mechanism and an affirmation that these discoveries are not against religion or against God. On the contrary, when you discover the goodness, beauty and order, you're not drawn to deny God, but to stand before the mystery. And that's exactly what the wisdom writers would want us to do.
Just off to beat the track, wasn't it fantastic that those young kids with the playing with dad?
Pardon?
Where the young kids were the playing with dad. They had the
Oh,
dad
yes,
that
yeah.
feed off the barrels.
Yeah, they had some they had some sort of wisdom that they picked up, the older kids anyway, for sure. Did you want to ask anything about that? And we just had a look at this morning, or reacting in any way to all of that stuff? Yeah, sure.
We talked about the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Wisdom is the first.
Yes.
This is the wisdom. Is this the wisdom?
This is the same wisdom. Yes, it's the same wisdom. Yeah. And what happened to this sense of, it's really the sense of God present in all that is, in every human heart, in every human soul, every. And as I said to you earlier, what happened was, part of it moved towards the incarnation. So Jesus then is the wisdom incarnate. So it went very concretely, a bit like Baruch and Sirach. It's in the law, it's in the temple. Some of it stayed more speculative, that it's really to do with the Holy Spirit. And these readings make very good readings for, reflection on the Holy Spirit. And then in later devotion, Orthodox and Catholic, these attributes were also then attached to the Blessed Virgin. So it just went in three directions after that. All good, all good.
But as you said there, it's an expression of the mind of God, and I know you said, therefore, it sort of points to the mind of God being feminine.
Yeah.
We haven't really taken that away.
We haven't, no. One of the things that came up in the synodal consultation was a renewed role for women in the church, and we while of course women are 70% of those attending any church, and every parish, if the women withdrew their services from any parish, the parish would collapse in the morning. But that hasn't been recognised, in terms of a voice within the overall structure. And I think there are two paths to recovery. One is this wisdom stuff, which is very useful, I think, for us, that it does affirm God as feminine as well as God as masculine. There are other texts as well which talk about God giving birth and writhing in labour pains and so on. But the wisdom stuff is best of all, really. And it means that the role of women needs to be recognised in light of the feminine mind of God, so to speak. The other place where we need to pay attention to is women in ministry, and that's obviously a longer discussion. But for my money, I want to promote it and talk about it when I can. Not just because I think if we had ordained women we'd have more priests, which we would have, but that's not the point. The point is you want the voice of women to go right up through all the structures of discernment and conversation, and that's more important than simply having more priests. And I think it's a kind of institutional self-harm to do without that voice. I think it's foolish, because there's a whole wisdom there and a whole experience that men can't readily access. Now, the synodal pathway, as you know, has 70 lay people voting at the synod. There'll be 70 lay people voting. I don't know what the percentage of is women, but I suppose about half, perhaps, or something like that, are women. And that's actually a complete innovation. And people don't quite realise how radical that is, in terms of the church. I mean, in any other context, it would seem a tiny token. But in terms of the way the church moves, it's a big deal. And an important one. So Pope Francis, while he is very slow to see women in ordained ministry, actually, is not slow to see them within the functioning of church structures, and with power to vote. And that's the key, obviously. Yeah.
Is he afraid of causing a schism?
Yeah, I'm sure he is. Yeah, I'm sure he is. Yeah, I'm sure he is. But I think it's I think it's just long overdue, to be honest with you. Just build a bridge and get over yourself, really.
No, I agree with all of that, but actually I was coming from it from a different place.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, obviously I agree with all of that, but I was just thinking that the mind of God is feminine. It just broadens our images of God.
Yes, it does.
And it could be helpful for men.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Like I have a Bible group and that, but I've had men say that they don't find some of the male images very helpful.
Yeah.
They don't speak to them in an emotional sense.
Yes. Yeah.
Because they're sort of the things they're used to.
Yeah.
And they don't always
Yeah.
speak to
Yeah.
Jesus, even the Good Shepherd. Somebody had a big issue with Jesus as the Good Shepherd, but anyway. But they were looking for something more emotional.
Yeah.
To
That you could latch onto.
maybe, as St. Paul talks about the hen and the chicken.
Jesus, in John's Gospel. Yeah.
So I think that it broadens out.
It does.
our images of God.
Yeah,
It's
very
really
usefully.
helpful.
Very usefully. And in any case, every human being, whether you're masculine or whether you're a man or woman, you're dealing with masculine, feminine dimensions of yourself. And some people have had difficult experiences of father, either having a father or being a father, that really won't help them to use that language about God. And you do need an alternative set of images, and it's there. I mean, there's a wonderful book called Saint Paul, Our Mother Saint Paul. Sounds like a real contradiction. But he does use maternal imagery. You know, in 1 Thessalonians, he says, like a nursing mother feeding her own children, I fed you. You know, lovely image in 1 Thessalonians. So he does use that sort of feminine, maternal imagery. And it's useful to it's good to broaden the spectrum and to see that it's not just text here and there which permit it, but there's a substantial track in the wisdom books. This is the most substantial of kind of feminine imagery for God in the biblical books, strongest.
And the period in the history of the church is woman, become less important.
Now, it happened, unfortunately, very early. In St. Paul's churches, women were absolutely equal, and he practiced it. There's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. And in Romans 16, there's a clear list of women in ministry. So it's very evident in St. Paul's writing that the later instruction, a woman must keep silent in church, is impossible, because he has a woman apostle, a woman deacon, and women catechists, basically. In Romans 16, there's a very good list. You just need to pay attention to the words. They're described as working hard, and as a woman you might say, what else is new? But working hard in that context means working hard as an evangelist. It doesn't mean knitting, you know, with all respect to knitting. Men knit too, as they say.
They tried to change even the women into men. like
That's correct.
Agnes and Julia.
That's correct. Paul mentions
It sounds like control or power or something.
that's exactly what it is. In Romans 16, there's a mention of a woman called Junia, and the accent was changed in the Greek to make sure she was a man, in case we would have the horror of St. Paul naming a woman as an apostle. Yeah. Well, we got over that. But the banning on women is 2 generations later, in letters written in St. Paul's name, but not by him. He's dead decades. When 1 and 2 Timothy and Titus are written, and they're very clear that a woman's place is in the home, and that she must be silent in church, and it's very cheeky. If she wants to know anything, let her ask her husband at home. It's very severe. It's very severe, and that then became the standard, you know, insofar as it can. Obviously, the writer is forbidding something, and as always, there's no need to forbid what's not happening. So clearly, women were talking in church, but he felt the need to forbid it. And that then became the tradition. But to me, it's super clear that of the 13 letters under the name of St. Paul in the New Testament, 7 can go back to him for sure. And then I think Colossians and Ephesians do not go back to St. Paul. I think they're second generation Paulinism. They're a conservative Paul, you know, effectively. And then you have the next generation, which is 1 and 2 Timothy and Titus, where you have what you might call reactionary Paul, a very negative picture of the social position of women. And what happened was the original bravery of St. Paul's vision, you know, which he himself wasn't totally consistent in enacting, but he did have women, you know, ministers, that all got extinguished at the end of the 1st century, and paradoxically in his name. One of the awkward things in the New Testament is that in 1 Corinthians 14, which is certainly by St. Paul, there's a passage forbidding the talking of women in church. Now, like many other people who study St. Paul, I do not think Paul wrote that paragraph. I think it was inserted when the letters were collected, and the conservative collectors wanted to make the great man say something which he himself would never have said. 1 Corinthians 14, there's a paragraph in there which St. Paul, I'm absolutely certain, didn't write. And I was talking about this recently in Maynooth, you know, and I can say this as a biblical scholar. St. Paul did not write this passage attribute to him. I leave to the systematic theologians the question of where was the Holy Spirit when this was all going on, you know. Stand up and speak, hearing all about it. But I think there's a recovery to be made of the original Pauline openness, and And I think I think of the proper inclusion of women within the ministry and structure of the church as a development of doctrine and an enrichment. I do not think of it as a contradiction of what went before. I think of it as a development, an evolution, and an enrichment, and good. And good.
But the popes, like Pope Gregory the First, I mean, the things they said about women, and Thomas Aquinas, that would put you off.
Yeah, well, of course it put you off her dindin. It would put you off, yeah. Anyway, look, history. We're at a point now where we can look at these things and see that there are some socially driven attitudes and ways of looking at things that needn't apply to us today. Yeah. Well and good. We haven't meandered completely now from Lady Wisdom, but so I do think the point made by Mary is a good one, that there's a big resource here for the feminine in God, and that it's not just odd passages that you do find here and there, God giving birth and all that kind of stuff, but it's much bigger here, and very very useful. Mary Magdalene, I mean, if you're very strict, which I tend to be about tracing history, there's very little known about her. Now, I admire her, and she's there, but there's very little known about her. In the tradition, she got mixed up with the woman at the well. She got mixed up with Mary of Bethany, and the woman who washed the feet, and the woman with the 7 devils. They were all under Pope Gregory. They were all compressed into one. And that's simply completely wrong. We're talking about 4 different women here, and let's just give them all their due. But Mary Magdalene is a bit of a mystery, and just in terms of being able to track her. She turns up in all the Gospels, at the crucifixion and resurrection, very, very richly in John's Gospel, and she turns up in chapter 8 in Luke as the women helping the surrounding support group for Jesus and the ministry. But that's it. And anything more than that much is, and you can trace that like biblically and trace it then in the artistic history and the spiritual history, but more than that is Dan Brown, basically. You go off the edge into fantasy, and stuff about Mary Magdalene and Jesus, having a love affair. That's all rubbish, basically. I wouldn't have no time for that.
The fact is, though, Jesus did make her the first apostle to the apostles.
Ah, yes.
That's
Yeah.
biblical.
That's in the John. Yeah, that's for sure. The women at the tomb, including Mary Magdalene, are the first proclaimers of the Gospels, and they are the apostles of the apostles. Yeah, perfect.
Pope Francis did
And Pope did reinstate her. Yeah.
It's interesting that the men didn't believe them. They had to go and see for themselves.
Yeah, that's men for you. That's men for you. That's men for you. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, interesting one. Good. Shall we rest it there? Okay. So we have mass at today at 12:30 is the time. The time varies a little bit, and we 12:30, 12:30 in the apparition chapel where we were, and we have a reader. So for Genesis chapter 15, and we gather again then at 2:30, and we'll spend a bit of time a bit more on Sirach, because with this background now, Sirach will make a lot of sense. So. Thanks very much. Thanks to all of you who joined us online. God bless.